Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Tapaharini. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to class 2 of Raja Yoga, Swami Vivekananda's book, Raja Yoga. Last time in class 1, about a month ago, we read through the entire preface of the book. Today we'll be starting to discuss chapter 1, introductory, so his introduction. And it's a long introduction, and we're only going to get through probably a few pages, because I strongly believe that we need to really close read the text carefully, that we shouldn't just read it superficially. So let's begin, let's plunge in, and I encourage all of you online and in person to follow along by reading along with me, with either a soft copy or a hard copy. So chapter 1, introductory. All our knowledge is based upon experience. What we call inferential knowledge, in which we go from the less to the more general, or from the general to the particular, has experience as its basis. In what are called the exact sciences, people easily find the truth because it appeals to the particular experiences of every human being. The scientist does not tell you to believe in anything, but he has certain results which come from his own experiences. And reasoning on them, when he asks us to believe in his conclusions, he appeals to some universal experience of humanity. In every exact science, there is a basis which is common to all humanity, so that we can at once see the truth or the fallacy of the conclusions drawn therefrom. Now, the question is, has religion any such basis or not? I shall have to answer the question both in the affirmative and in the negative. All right, let's pause here. There are quite a few things to discuss here. So first of all, his first statement, all our knowledge is based upon experience. This is a position that's known as empiricism in Western philosophy. There's an entire field of Western philosophy called epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, philosophical inquiry into what is knowledge, how do we gain knowledge, is it possible to gain knowledge? Sometimes some people are skeptics, David Hume and others, and they think we can't really know anything. Others say we do have knowledge, but then the question is, well, how do we gain knowledge? In India, in classical Indian philosophy, there's also a field called epistemology, except in Sanskrit, the term is pramanavada. Pramana means means of knowledge, the means by which we gain knowledge. And different schools of Indian philosophy accept a different number of pramanas and different kinds of pramanas, means of knowledge. Okay? The one that every single school of Indian philosophy accepts is perception. The Sanskrit term is pratyaksha, perception. Now, what's meant by perception? I'm perceiving you guys right now. You're perceiving me right now. It's a kind of perception. It's a kind of sense perception, right? In the West, those who defended empiricism tended to understand perception as sense perception. But in India, interestingly, from long back, they also accept perception as one of the main means of knowing. But their understanding of perception was much broader than the typical Western understanding of perception as just sense perception. Most Indian philosophers, not all, but many, like Nyaya philosophers, Vedantic philosophers, and others, what they say is that pratyaksha takes multiple forms. Pratyaksha meaning perception. One form is sense perception. Indriyaja pratyaksha. The kind of perception that is born from the senses, contact of sense organs with sense objects. But these philosophers claim there is another distinct form of perception, which is also a valid means of knowledge. These philosophers call it yogaja pratyaksha, perception born of yoga. Through yogic methods, we can attain perception, we can perceive supersensuous realities, things that are not perceivable by the five senses, things that are immaterial. Like what, you might ask? Like God, like the soul. How do we know we have a soul? Because this is asked by somebody in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Somebody asked Sri Ramakrishna, how do you know that you have a soul? He says, rishis have directly experienced their soul. That's perception as well. So I'm perceiving you guys, that's a sense perception. But yogis can perceive their soul, yogis can perceive God. These fall under the category of perception. This is important to keep in mind. I'm just unpacking the first sentence, but it's very important to keep this in mind. That when Swamiji here talks about experience, he means perception, experiential perception, right, or perceptual experience. But he's thinking of perceptual experience as encompassing both sense perception and supersensuous perception. Okay? If you want proof, we'll see later. He'll say it explicitly later, but I think it's important to keep this in mind from the beginning. Then, the next sentence, he says, what we call inferential knowledge, in which we go from the less to the more general, or from the general to the particular, has experience as its basis. So I think he's thinking of Indian Pramanavada here, Indian epistemology. Because, as I mentioned, the most fundamental form of, or the most fundamental means of knowledge is pratyaksha, perception. Most schools, but not all schools, accept a second means of knowing, called anumana. Anumana is inference, inferential reasoning. And Swamiji adds, inferential reasoning on the basis of our perceptions. And he gives two fundamental He mentions two fundamental cases of inferential knowledge. One is going from the less to the more general. This is induction. This is what's known as inductive inferential reasoning. Okay, an example. I see a crow outside. That crow is black. I've been seeing crows for many, many years. Every single crow I've ever seen, what color? Black. I've never seen a non-black crow. On the basis of my perceptions of crows throughout my life, I can make an inductive argument. And I can say, this crow I saw yesterday was black. The crow I saw a week ago was black. The crow I saw 5 years ago was black. And even though I can't claim to have seen all the crows in the world, I believe that it's reasonable to hold that all crows are black. You can't possibly prove that because you can't take a picture of every single crow in the world and verify that they're all black. But this is the nature of induction. It goes from the less general to the more general. You start with perception of something specific. Crow 1, crow 2, crow 3. And you're making a universal claim, a general claim about all crows. All crows are black. Okay? Then Swamiji mentions the other kind of inferential reasoning. He says when you move from the general to the particular, top down, instead of bottom up like induction, crow 1, crow 2, going up to all crows, you go top, this is top down. Deduction is top down. You start from the general and you move to the specific, the particular. What's an example of this? One famous example in Western philosophy that's commonly used of deduction, a deductive argument, is all human beings are mortal. They die. All human beings die. All human beings are mortal. Number 2, Socrates is a human being. What follows from that? What's the conclusion? Socrates is going to die. Poor Socrates. Socrates is mortal. That's an example of a deductive argument. You move from a general claim, which is that all human beings are mortal, to the specific claim that Socrates is mortal. That's another kind of inferential reasoning, but it's top-down, deduction. Swamiji is thinking of both kinds. We find both kinds in Indian epistemology as well. Okay, but what he's saying is, yes, there is another kind of knowing. It's called inferential reasoning. That's distinct from pratyaksha, from perception. But even that inferential reasoning is ultimately based on our experience. How do we know that all human beings are mortal? From our experience. How do we know that the crow I saw yesterday is black? Well, because I saw it. That's also perception. And on that basis, I can deduce, or I can infer that all crows are black. Okay? Okay. And then he explains what he takes to be the hallmark of science, or at least one of the hallmarks of science. What's that? He says that every exact science is based upon universal experience. And so a scientist will not say, just believe what I say on faith. He'll never say that, he or she. What that scientist will say is, I've got a hypothesis. I'm then going to try to verify this hypothesis by means of an experiment. And in that experiment, involves various kinds of experiences. I experience mixing this chemical with that chemical, and then I see what results, and whether that confirms my hypothesis or disproves it. And then that scientist will present his or her results to the rest of the world. And what about us? Should we just swallow it? Well, it depends. If we're non-experts, then usually we do have to just swallow it. And then there's this funny situation of every day scientific studies seem to be proving the opposite of what they proved 2 days before. Is coffee good for you or bad for you? Is drinking 1 glass of red wine a day good for you or bad for you? Is this good for you or that? Different kinds of food. Here in Hollywood, everybody's an amateur doctor, so I'm getting health advice from everybody. I'm looking at you now. And so they're all quoting studies, but they're all conflicting with each other. Is sodium good for you? Is sodium bad for you? How do you reduce your blood pressure? Anyway, that's another issue. Actually, Swami talks about this too, and he pokes fun at scientists because he says, I talked about this in my class on what is Hindu Dharma way back a few months ago. But he says these popes of modern science, they want you to believe things even more fantastic than our religious popes. But because sciences enjoy so much prestige now in our post-Enlightenment age, we're just happy to swallow whatever they say. So if a scientist says something, then we should accept it. But if it's a priest, no, then we should be skeptical. So we should be skeptical also of scientific claims. I think that's part of what Swamiji was saying. We shouldn't just swallow everything that scientists say, hook, line, and sinker. Now, Swamiji comes to a really, really interesting question after explaining that every exact science, every natural science, mathematics, chemistry, physics, and so on, biology, are all based on the universal experience of humanity. Then he says, has religion any such basis in experience? And his answer is even more interesting. He says, yes and no. Okay. In the next paragraph, he's going to explain what he means by yes and no, or at least I hope he does. So let's read that next paragraph, and then I'm going to ask you what his answer to this question is, and then I'll give you my thoughts about it. So, second paragraph of the introduction. Religion, as it is generally taught all over the world, is said to be based upon faith and belief, and in most cases consists only of different sets of theories. And that is the reason why we find all religions quarreling with one another. These theories, again, are based upon belief. One man says there is a great being sitting above the clouds and governing the whole universe, and he asks me to believe that solely on the authority of his assertion. In the same way, I may have my own ideas, which I am asking others to believe, and if they ask a reason, I cannot give them any. That is why religion and metaphysical philosophy have a bad name nowadays. Every educated man seems to say, oh, these religions are only bundles of theories without any standard to judge them by, each man preaching his own pet ideas. Nevertheless, there is a basis of universal belief in religion, governing all the different theories and all the varying ideas of different sects in different countries. Going to their basis, we find that they also are based upon universal experiences. Let's pause here. Do we have enough information yet to answer in what sense Swamiji means that religion does have a basis in universal experience, and at the same time, religion does not have a basis in universal experience? What do you think he means by that? Why does he answer the question yes and no? Does religion have a basis in experience? Why not just say yes? Why is he saying yes and no? I shall have to answer the question both in the affirmative and in the negative. What's his affirmative answer and what's his negative answer? Anyone want to take a stab? People are nervous. Anyone? Either one. You can start with the negative if you want, if you're afraid of the affirmative. Yeah, Narayana.
So he's saying that people don't have any reason, that it's just a belief. And so that would be a negative, that they can't really prove what they're saying as a, to ask people just to believe it.
Yeah, good, yeah, so. Yeah. Okay, but then what's the affirmative then?
Well,
I think you're on the right track. Kiran, it looks like Kiran has, yeah, okay, well, yeah.
You can say something.
Say something.
Okay, well, as I understand it, I would say he means that the foundation basically of all religions is actually based on experience, maybe of a few people,
right.
And then maybe got lost, but so the founding people.
The founders, yeah.
The founders.
Yeah.
There you go, sorry.
Yeah.
The founders are basically the ones that have had the actual experience instead of just, theorizing.
Yes, perfect, exactly. I think that's right. So the affirmative answer to the question is, yes, religion does have a basis in universal experience. If we go back to the founders of the respective religions. And Narayana is, I think, on the right track in answering the question in the negative, but I just want to make it a little bit clearer. It depends on how you define religion. Do you mean religion in its deepest original sense? By going back to the original scriptures and looking at the teachings of the great founders and their experiences? Then the answer is yes. But if you understand religion as the way that religion is ordinarily practiced by most people these days, then the answer seems to be no. This is what Swamiji seems to be saying. Because most people these days are not talking about the spiritual experiences of their founders. They're not even aspiring to have their own spiritual experiences. They tend to believe things on blind faith. A couple days ago I was swimming, and in the adjacent lane, I would do this 1 hour swim, then at the end, I was just catching my breath, and there's this old Asian lady, anyway, there's an elderly person in the next lane, and she looks at me with a big smile on her face. She said, "You have good exercise. You did a lot of exercise. Good." I said, "Thank you." Then she gives me her name. And I said, "My name is Swami." Then she says, "Are you Christian?" And I said, "No." Oh, I didn't say no. I said, "I'm a Hindu monk." Because I don't see that as incompatible with Christianity. So I said, "I'm a Hindu monk." Then she looked at me. She says, better to believe in Jesus." So that's just one of many examples of run-ins I've had in the past few years with people in that second category. These people who, she's not giving me arguments for why I should be Christian or why the Hindu God is not as good as the Christian God, but I should accept it because it's better, because her belief is better than my belief, you see. Okay. So, any questions about this so far? Why Swamiji answers this question, yes and no. Yes, religion is based on universal experience if you go back to the religion of the founders and the original core, spiritual core of every religion. And no, if we judge religion based on ordinary people, most people these days, okay, who kind of think of religion in terms of blind faith. All right, let's read the next paragraph. In the first place, if you analyze all the various religions of the world, you will find that these are divided into two classes, those with a book and those without a book. Those with a book are the strongest and have the largest number of followers. Those without books have mostly died out, and the few new ones have very small followings. Yet in all of them, we find one consensus of opinion, that the truths they teach are the results of the experiences of particular persons. This is what Kiran was saying. Do you read ahead, or did you? She's a genius. Look at that. The Christian asks you to believe in his religion, to believe in Christ, and to believe in him as the incarnation of God, to believe in a God, in a soul, and in a better state of that soul. If I ask him for reason, he says he believes in them. But if you go to the fountainhead of Christianity, you will find that it is based upon experience. Christ said he saw God. The disciples said they felt God, and so forth. Similarly, in Buddhism, it is Buddha's experience. He experienced certain truths, saw them, came in contact with them, and preached them to the world. So with the Hindus. In their books, the writers who are called rishis or sages declare they experienced certain truths, and these they preach. Thus, it is clear that all the religions of the world have been built upon that one universal and adamantine foundation of all our knowledge, direct experience. The teachers all saw God. They all saw their own souls. They saw their future. They saw their eternity. And what they saw, they preached. Only there is this difference, that by most of these religions, especially in modern times, a peculiar claim is made, namely, that these experiences are impossible at the present day. They were only possible with the few men who were the first founders of the religions that subsequently bore their names. At the present time, these experiences have become obsolete, and therefore we have now to take religion on belief. This I entirely deny. If there has been one experience in this world in any particular branch of knowledge, it absolutely follows that that experience has been possible millions of times before and will be repeated eternally. Uniformity is the rigorous law of nature. What once happened can happen always. So this is a very dense paragraph. Let's go through it somewhat systematically here. So from the beginning of this third paragraph, he distinguishes the different religions of the world into two categories: religions with a book and religions without a book. Yeah. Microphone.
Yes, this is really a very interesting thing to say. Every time I've read this 2 or 3 times, he says 2 classes, and I go, wonder what the 2 classes are. With a book, without. But that surprises me. So then I try to think of what there are religions that don't have a book, and I sort of a little stumped there.
Okay, any guess? Any ideas as to religions that don't have a book? Please.
Shamanism.
Very good. Shamanism.
Shamanism.
Good. Yeah.
Also, Ifa.
Ifa. Yeah. Lisa in the back.
Falun Gong.
Falun Gong in China.
Falun Gong.
Yeah. I think Shintoism in Japan. Many African tribal religions. So there are many, many religions. Actually, There are more religions without books than with books, is my guess. It's the major religions that we could, the ones that are most widely known that tend to have books. What are they? Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, all based on foundational scriptures, right? And there are others, of course. But thank you for mentioning examples of religions without books. And it's not a coincidence that you haven't heard of some of these religions. That's exactly Swamiji's point, right? They didn't take off in the way that these religions with books took off and continue to take off. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to point out. But the second thing is, you might think, well, of all the ways to categorize different religions, why is he making such heavy weather of the fact that a religion has a book or doesn't have a book? What's the big deal about a book? But then he explains it in the remainder of the paragraph. Because what does he say? Skip to the middle of the paragraph that I just read. See, when he says, all the founders of religions have had direct experiences of the supersensuous truths that they teach, right? Then he says, so with the Hindus. In their books, the writers who are called rishis, or sages, declare they experienced certain truths, and these they preach. So see, this is the way that he's connecting what he just said about distinguishing different kinds of religions, religions with a book and religions without a book, to the previous paragraphs. About what? Universal experience. Because what are religious scriptures? But records of the spiritual experiences of the great sages of the different religions. That's how he's defining the religious scriptures, you see. What is the Bible? They're a record of Moses' experiences in the Hebrew Bible. They're records of the experiences of Jesus, St. Paul in the New Testament, right? What about Buddha's teachings? They're records of his experiences of nirvana. What about the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita? These are records of, these are the sages' own recordings of their own spiritual experiences. Now, because we're in 2023 and many of you were born and raised in the West, you might think this is very logical. In an Indian context, what Swamiji is saying is extremely radical. This is something that is easy to overlook. So I want to emphasize this. If we go back to the traditional understanding of the Vedas, just within the Hindu context here. Yeah.
It was an oral tradition.
Yeah, that's true. But what is it? Would the traditionalists, Vedic traditionalists, accept what Swamiji says? Vedas are authorless. Apaurusheya is the Sanskrit term. The Vedas have no author. You might think, how can a book not have an author? Ghostwriting or what? No. They say that the Vedas existed eternally. If something is eternal, it can't have an author. If there's an author, then it means it didn't exist before that author authored the book, right? But the Vedas are eternal, so it can't have an author. The words just exist in this eternal space and no author. Eternal and no author. Swami Vivekananda attacks this view. And I'm going to be reading from my book on Swami Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda's Vedanta Cosmopolitanism. I've got a section here talking about Swamiji's understanding of the religious scriptures. So he says, this is also a bit later in Raja Yoga, okay? He says, this is Swamiji now. The only proof of the scriptures is that they were the testimony of competent persons. Okay, which he's taking all the religious scriptures, whether it's the Bible or the Dhammapada or the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran, as the testimony of competent persons, credible people, who claim to have directly experienced what they're talking about. Okay? And he says, by contrast, he says, this is from his notes taken down in Madras, written way back 1892 to 1893, right before he left for the US. He says, The Vedas are anadi, eternal. The meaning of the statement, he's saying, the meaning of this statement is not, as is erroneously supposed by some, that the words of the Vedas are anadi, meaning eternal or beginningless, but that the spiritual laws inculcated by the Vedas are such. These laws, which are immutable and eternal, have been discovered at various times by great men or rishis, though some of them are forgotten now, while others are preserved. See the distinction he's drawing here. He says the Vedas in one sense are eternal. In what sense? Because the Vedas teach eternal spiritual laws. The spiritual laws that you find in the Vedas are eternal. But the words in the Vedas, not eternal. Because he thinks that's not rational. It's not rational to hold that view, the view of the Vedic fundamentalist. In fact, there's a funnier passage where he makes fun of what he calls the bigotry of Vedic orthodoxy. Let me read that to you. He says, he's talking about bigotry in general in religion. He says, such bigotry is characteristic of the orthodox element of all religions. So Hinduism doesn't get off the hook here. If we're criticizing Christian fundamentalists or Islamic fundamentalists, no, there's also Hindu fundamentalism. He says, for instance, the orthodox followers of the Vedas claim that the Vedas are the only authentic word of God in the world, that God has spoken to the world only through the Vedas. Not only that, but that the world itself exists by virtue of the Vedas. Vedic traditions actually make this claim. He says, and he's explaining that view, before the world was, the Vedas were. Everything in the world exists because it is in the Vedas. A cow exists because the name cow is in the Vedas. That is, because the animal we know as a cow is mentioned in the Vedas. The language of the Vedas is the original language of God. All other languages are mere dialects and not of God. So some of you might be surprised to hear that there's also such a thing as Vedic fundamentalism, but there is that as well. And so he rejects this. He thinks this is bigotry. It's religious fanaticism. And he says a much more rational, sensible understanding of the religious scriptures throughout the world is that they are records of the spiritual experiences of their founders. Okay? And so he just says the scriptures are authored. The authors of the scriptures are these great sages, rishis, who have had these direct spiritual experiences. That's the idea. Okay. And right after that he says, thus it is clear that all the religions of the world have been built upon that one universal and adamantine foundation of all our knowledge, direct experience. So this is, as Kiran was pointing out, this is his affirmative answer to his original question. Does religion have a basis in universal experience? His answer is yes, if you go back to the source of each religion, to the founding fathers or mothers of each religion. Okay. But then he adds another interesting point. He says, but there's this difference that by most of these religions, especially in modern times, a peculiar claim is made, namely that these experiences are impossible at the present day. What do you think he has in mind here? Do you think it's true? Do you agree with him? Anyone want to take a stab? Yeah, it looks like you have something to say. Kiran? No. Who has the mic? Yeah, you just give it to her. You struck gold the first time. All right, she's too nervous. All right.
Well, I just found that really surprising. I didn't know that people said you couldn't experience it today. I was brought up as a Christian, and I never really heard that you couldn't experience it. So that's sort of surprising.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk. So there are different things here. Yeah, go ahead, please. Bharat?
Well, I was just going to say,
you're the mic guy, so I keep
as a counterpoint to that,
yeah.
I grew up Christian as well, and I did kind of hear that, especially when it comes to like certain things that happen in the Bible, like, oh, these miracles don't happen today on the level that they did, and all kinds of explanations for why.
For me as well, I've read the Gita, I've read the Bible, I've read the Quran. There's obviously a lot of things in there that I love and agree with, but at the same time, I think there are a lot of things there that are dated and are irrelevant to today's world. I feel like I was born to a very Hindu mother and a Muslim father, so, and I went to Catholic school. So
Oh, interesting. You got all three.
Elementary school
Religious
Catholic,
books.
high school Catholic. So I believe in all three, but I do also think there are, a lot of things in all three that I don't agree with. But at the same time, I embrace all three, and I think I feel like in my little world, like I feel like it's okay to pull from all three, or
Yeah, no,
as
I
many
think
as you
that's
want,
good.
right?
I mean, no, I think that's a valid point. I want to bring it back, though, to this issue of what Swamiji might have meant when he said that many people these days think that the kinds of spiritual experiences that the founders of religions had are no longer accessible or worth pursuing. And one thing I was thinking about within the context of Christianity is the founding of Protestantism. And just Protestantism. Martin Luther in Germany, he started out as a Catholic monk. And then he saw that they were doing all sorts of weird things, and that monastic life was very difficult for him. And then he founded Protestantism. And he rejected monasticism. And arguably, and Swamiji says this elsewhere, he kind of criticizes Protestantism for lowering the ideal of Christianity. Because where Christ, if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, and I talked about this in my lecture on Sunday, the teachings are very, very high-pitched. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Be humble, turn the other cheek, and so on and so forth. Love thy neighbor as thyself, love God with all your heart. And it's something that's worth asking. I mean, because this is or at least was a Christian country, and now it still sort of is. Do most people try to live up to Jesus' teachings? Do they try to see God? In fact, think about that teaching of Jesus's. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The Vedantin will immediately say, this is pure Vedanta. Purify yourself, and you will have the direct realization of God. But most Christians, I would say, most Orthodox Christians, they don't interpret seeing God in that sense. It depends on I don't want to generalize, but many Christians at least will say, yes, they will see God means after you leave your body, you go to heaven. But having a direct spiritual experience while still in this body, I think that fewer and fewer people actually believe this. So I'm inclined to agree with Swamiji on this, but I want each of you to think for yourself about that and ask yourself whether that's really true. Okay, and then he says, why does he deny it? Why does he deny this claim? What's his argument against the view that, well, okay, Jesus might have had a genuine spiritual experience, or Muhammad might have, or Buddha might have, or the great rishis, but I'm just an ordinary dude. So who am I to have spiritual experiences? He says, this I entirely deny. If there has been one experience in this world in any particular branch of knowledge, it absolutely follows that that experience has been possible millions of times before and will be repeated eternally. Uniformity is the rigorous law of nature. What once happened can happen always. So he's giving an argument, and he's saying, well, if one person had a particular experience, it stands to reason that any one of us can have the very same experience, provided we take the necessary steps, follow the method that that person followed to have that experience. Right? If somebody has an experience of the Kremlin in Russia, and that person calls me and says, I'm having an experience of the Kremlin in Russia. And I say, great. Well, can I have the experience of the Kremlin? The answer is yes, except that what do I have to do? I have to jump on a plane, I have to fly to Russia, and then I have to go in front of the Kremlin, then I can see the Kremlin. I can't see the Kremlin from here. You have to follow the steps that that person took in order to have that experience. That's going to become important shortly, okay? And it's, okay, let's read one more paragraph, and then we'll open up to questions. The teachers of the science of yoga. Notice already, the science of yoga. This is a pregnant term, the science of yoga. The teachers of the science of yoga, therefore, declare that religion is not only based upon the experience of ancient times, but that no man can be religious until he has the same perceptions himself. Yoga is the science which teaches us how to get these perceptions. It teaches us the methods by which we can have the same experiences that these great sages had. It is not much use to talk about religion until one has felt it. Why is there so much disturbance, so much fighting and quarreling in the name of God? There has been more bloodshed in the name of God than for any other cause, because people never went to the fountainhead. They were content only to give a mental assent to the customs of their forefathers and wanted others to do the same. What right has a man to say he has a soul if he does not feel it, or that there is a God if he does not see him? If there is a God, we must see him. If there is a soul, we must perceive it. Otherwise, it is better not to believe. It is better to be an outspoken atheist than a hypocrite. The modern idea, on the one hand, with the learned, is that religion and metaphysics and all search after a supreme being are futile. On the other hand, with the semi-educated, so he's really poking these, with the semi-educated as opposed to the learned, the idea seems to be that these things really have no basis. Their only value consists in the fact that they furnish strong motive powers for doing good to the world. If men believe in a God, they may become good and moral and so make good citizens. We cannot blame them for holding such ideas, seeing that all the teaching these men get is simply to believe in an eternal rigmarole of words without any substance behind them. They are asked to live upon words. Can they do it? If they could, I should not have the least regard for human nature. Man wants truth, wants to experience truth for himself. When he has grasped it, realized it, felt it within his heart of hearts, then alone, declare the Vedas, would all doubts vanish, all darkness be scattered, and all crookedness be made straight. Ye children of immortality, even those who live in the highest sphere, the way is found. There is a way out of all this darkness, and that is by perceiving him who is beyond all darkness. There is no other way. So, at the beginning of this paragraph, he's talking about the science of yoga. Let me go back for a second to the very first paragraph, and let's remember the question that he started with. He says, does religion have a basis in universal experience or not? But right before that, he also talks about science. And the thing he says about the sciences that most of us know about, physics and biology and chemistry, is that they're all based on universal experience. So I think there's an implied second question here. So the question he explicitly asks is, does religion have a basis in universal experience? But another way of putting that same question is religion a science? Do you follow why? Because he's defining science as something that's based on universal experience. So when he asks, is religion based on universal experience, it's just another way of asking the question, is religion a science? Should we consider religion to be a science in the rigorous sense? And his answer is yes, because religions are grounded in universal experience, and therefore they count just as much as a science as physics or math or chemistry or biology. So this is in the background when he says the teachers of the science of yoga. He's slipping in the term here, but it's very important. The teachers of the science of yoga, the yoga philosophy that we'll be studying for a while, for the remainder of this class, Raja Yoga, is based on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, the yoga philosophy of Patanjali. That's what he's thinking of when he's talking about the science of yoga. Okay? And he says that the beauty of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is that it doesn't just tell us that there are these wonderful spiritual experiences, Nirbija Samadhi, and all these wonderful spiritual experiences, Kaivalya, which is your recognition that you are the Purusha, a soul, an eternal soul, separate from the body-mind complex, all these wonderful things. It gives you a systematic method for attaining that spiritual experience. Patanjali calls it Ashtanga Yoga, the 8-limbed yoga, Yama, Niyama. We'll get to all that eventually. And there are other methods that are taught in the same text. You see, the text teaches you, here's the goal, here's the truth, and here's how you yourself can realize that truth by means of these methods. Follow these methods, and you will realize that same truth. And if you follow these methods and you find that you don't get the result that we're promising, then either you're doing something wrong or we're bogus. But before you practice those methods earnestly, you have no right to dismiss what we're saying. This is the basic idea. Yeah, Mike, yeah. Oh, you're holding.
So I just wanted to say it seems to me to be such a genius for him to be talking about science to the West. You know, he comes from India where you don't think of things as being scientific. And he comes to the West, and who's he going to talk to is people that believe in science. And he's just using science over and over to bring in his point. I just think it's such genius.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Yeah, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, to kill yourself, you only need a nail file. And he was thinking of, in his time, they use this like a special way to cut your nails. And you can, it's like kind of a pin. And so if you just slit your throat with that pin, you kill yourself. But he says to kill others, you can't kill others with just a pin. They'll block it or they'll throw it, you know. You need a sword and a shield. And so this is the way I think about Swamiji, is that Sri Ramakrishna specifically groomed Swami Vivekananda to preach in the West, to be able to convince Westerners, skeptics, materialists of the truth of religion. But we should also keep in mind that in his time, India was ruled by the British. Most of his teachers were Westerners. He was at Scottish Church College. And so he studied philosophy, and so he was kind of up on modern trends. And he was an avid, voracious reader as well. So he was kind of up on the modern Western literature as well. He studied Darwinian evolution and many other things. Another thing is, when he says, if there is a God, we must see him. If there is a soul, we must perceive it. Otherwise, it is better not to believe. Now, we have to be careful here. Is he saying that so long as we have not realized God, we shouldn't believe in God? So long as we have not realized that we are a soul separate from the body-mind complex, we shouldn't believe that we have souls? What do you think? And if that's not what he's saying, what is he saying? Can you give the mic to Giran? Oh. She never talks. That's why and then we'll get to Alice. Yeah. This is a big day. She's talking twice. The second time. Okay, go ahead. Please, yes.
Well, in this case, the way the way I like to think about it is almost like in the basis of like that scientific method. Mm-hmm. It would be like a hypothesis. So it's a hypothesis until you prove it true. Yeah. But there's no, you cannot either say yes or no because you haven't done anything to prove the hypothesis. Right. So I would think of it that way.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I think the analogy with the scientific hypothesis is helpful. And the only, I think, maybe slight disanalogy here is, see, in the case of a scientific hypothesis, we can be completely neutral as to whether the hypothesis is true or not. And we can do the experiment, and then at the end of it, the hypothesis either turns out to be true or false, right? Or maybe partly true, partly false. In the case of religion, if you're completely neutral about whether there's a God or a soul, are you going to be able to make much progress? This is an interesting question. And, I'm reminded of the fact that Sri Ramakrishna again and again and again says faith, 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 bishash, bishash, bishash. These are people, they haven't had the realization yet. But here's the difference. It's not blind faith. Why is it not blind faith? Because the faith is based on the testimony of realized souls. You see, go back to when Sri Ramakrishna was in the sadhana period before he had his first realization. And he's weeping for God. Oh, Kali, why are you not revealing yourself to me? He says, then he mentions Ram Prasad, one of his favorite singers, who was a great realized soul. He realized Mother Kali through his spiritual practice of music, actually. And he says, oh, Mother, Ram Prasad says that he has realized you, and it's possible to realize you through intense prayer, through longing. You see the idea here. I see that as capturing what Sri Ramakrishna meant by faith. This is not blind faith. It's belief in the reality of God, supersensuous realities like God and the soul, on the basis of the testimony of great realized souls. You see, which tilts us away from just strict neutrality and toward a genuine, rationally grounded faith in supersensuous realities, which I think you're right, which we need to try to verify for ourselves as genuine spiritual aspirants. And he says it's a shame if you kind of give up on the ideal of verification, of direct experiential verification. Because then you really are you're starting with faith and ending with faith. That's not what, you can start with a rationally grounded faith, a reasonable faith, a faith based on the testimony of credible mystics. But you can't stop there. If you're a genuine spiritual aspirant, you have to move forward and try to verify that same experience for yourself by following the methods laid down in your particular religion, in your spiritual path. Does that make sense? Yeah, could you give the mic to David?
I had something I just thought about when you said that. Is we have faith in so many things already. You'll see a commercial about a new restaurant, and you'll like the way it looks, and then you can't taste it through the commercial, but you'll go verify it, right?
Yeah.
You go to the restaurant because it looked good,
Yeah.
and go verify,
Yeah.
is it good? And then you'll
Yeah.
have the experience,
Yeah.
and then you'll share that. And
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Another thing, I wanted to do this before we wrap up the class. He makes this really interesting distinction between the learned and the semi-educated, which I think is really hilarious, especially because I studied philosophy, and so I think he has particular people in mind here. So let's look carefully at what he says. The modern idea on the one hand with the learned, and he puts it in quotes, the learned, which is even worse, just a real good dig, is that religion and metaphysics and all search after a supreme being are futile. Who does he have in mind? Any guesses? And why does he call these people learned? What's the view, first of all? What is the view? That religion and metaphysics and all search after a supreme being are futile.
Well, scientists.
Okay, but what is that position called, if we were to give it a name?
Intellectuals.
No, you're talking about the people. I'm not asking about what kind of people these are. I'm asking about, what do you call the view that religion and metaphysics and all search after a supreme being are futile?
Atheism.
This is interesting. Is it atheism or is it something else? Yeah, no, there you go. That's it. Yeah. I think the second answer is right. Your last answer is correct. I think by the learned, see, religion and metaphysics and all search after a supreme being are futile. Notice the language here. Be very careful here. He's not saying that religion and metaphysics and the supreme being, all of that's bogus. Not true. That would be atheism. What he's saying is, even if there is a supreme being, even if religion is true, we can never realize, we can never verify this truth for ourselves. Because our minds are finite, we're these limited beings, human beings with these puny intellects. Who was one of the first famous philosophers to say this? Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher. And in Swamiji's time, there were philosophers in the West following Kant who defended similar views, like Herbert Spencer, with whom Swamiji had a little correspondence, in fact, interestingly enough, when he was young. He wrote a letter to Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer has this idea of what he called, with a capital U, the unknowable. He believed in an absolute, and he says that, but unfortunately that absolute is unknowable. Because we're not endowed with that ability to realize the absolute. So I think when Swamiji is thinking of the learned here, he's thinking of these Western philosophers of his time, like Herbert Spencer. Another one is T.H. Huxley, who in fact coined the term agnosticism. Thomas Henry Huxley coined the term agnosticism, wrote an essay called Agnosticism where he introduces the term. And both of these philosophers were strongly influenced by Kant, who I think Swami Vivekananda had read Kant when he was at Scottish Church College because he was a philosophy major as an undergraduate. And he read Kant, and he knew that Kant also was a kind of theoretical agnostic in that sense. So these are the learned. Now the worst category, the semi-educated. On the other hand, with the semi-educated, the idea seems to be that these things really have no basis. Their only value consists in the fact that they furnish strong motive powers for doing good to the world. If men believe in a God, they may become good and moral and so make good citizens. This is, I think, what you were calling atheism. Why? Because it's saying the semi-educated think that these things have no basis. You see the difference? The first position, which I'm characterizing as the agnostic position, is that a supreme being might exist, we might have souls, but there's no way for us to know. We can never gain knowledge of God or the fact that we have a soul. And the second position of the semi-educated is atheism, which is that religion is bogus. Why is it that he's calling these people semi-learned? Why are the atheists the ones who are semi-learned? And why is he giving a little bit more credit to the agnostics? This is an interesting question. Any guesses? I have my own thought about this. Yeah, Ellis?
Because the agnostics at least will leave it open that there could be God or higher power.
Absolutely. And I think I think Swamiji's view is that that's the more rigorous position. How can you possibly prove that God doesn't exist? How can you possibly prove that we don't have souls? Go ahead and try. You'll fall flat on your face. I had this argument when I was in grad school at Berkeley. I had this staunchly atheistic philosopher friend. And he was an atheist. He was trying to defend atheism. I said, it's just not philosophically rigorous for you to hold that view. It's more rigorous. It's rigorous to believe that to be an agnostic, but not to be an atheist. Give me the argument that there's no God. And there are no knockdown arguments. That's the difficulty. Okay, so I think that's why he's giving a little bit more credit to the learned, who are agnostics, rather than the semi-educated, who are really not even smart enough to realize that atheism is really unprovable, that you can't actually justify atheism in a rigorous way. And finally, and by the way, whom might he have had in mind? One possibility is John Stuart Mill. But it's complicated, John Stuart Mill, because he was an agnostic on the one hand. On the other hand, he wrote an essay called The Utility of Religion, where he's making exactly the kind of points that Swamiji is mentioning under the category of the semi-educated. Religion is not true, it's bogus, but it's good for people to believe in it, because otherwise people would do all sorts of bad things and commit many more sins than they already do. So religion is a social good and a moral good, even though metaphysically, in reality, it's totally bogus. And Swamiji had studied John Stuart Mill as well in his undergrad days and later, utilitarianism and other work. So I think he was, and it might not be that he was thinking of Mill, but Mill's followers. Because sometimes some of Mill's followers were less agnostic and more atheist, but still accepted his views on the utility of religion. So it's possible that he had in mind some followers of John Stuart Mill who are atheists, but who believe that religion is still a net good from the standpoint of social benefits. Okay? And then finally, a little quiz, a scriptural quiz. When he says, man wants truth, wants to experience truth for himself, when he has grasped it, realized it, felt it within his heart of hearts, then alone declare the Vedas. Would all doubts vanish, all darkness be scattered, and all crookedness be made straight. Any idea what he's thinking of here from the Vedas? What passage or passages? It's not entirely clear. He's not quoting here, but especially this phrase, would all doubts vanish, I think he's thinking of Mundaka Upanishad 2.2.8. Vidyate hridaya grantish chidyante sarva samshayaha. Chidyante sarva samshayaha means all doubts disappear. Kshiyante chasya karmani tasmin drishte paravare. When one realizes the supreme truth, the highest truth, Brahman, Then all the knots of the heart are cut asunder. All one's doubts are finally resolved, dissolved, destroyed. And all one's karma is also destroyed. So this is interesting because it means, and this is reassuring actually, to be told that, look, every spiritual aspirant will face doubts at some points in their spiritual journey. There's no spiritual aspirant, no genuine spiritual aspirant who is free from doubts. Doubts are completely removed only after spiritual realization. Okay, so keep that in mind. So we shouldn't be ashamed of asking questions and having doubts. And one thing I like in Christian theology is this concept of faith-seeking understanding. And they encourage you to ask difficult questions. If God is perfectly loving, why is there so much suffering in the world? You know, if God exists, why doesn't God reveal himself or herself to me? These are legitimate questions to ask. We should be asking these questions, and we should try to find answers in our respective traditions. Then Swamiji quotes something from the Vedas. He says, "Ye children of immortality, even those who live in the highest sphere, the way is found, semicolon. There is a way out of all this darkness, and that is by perceiving him who is beyond all darkness. There is no other way." Here he's thinking of a different Upanishad. Any idea which, do you want to take a random guess? Which Upanishad is he thinking of here? It's one of his favorite passages from the Upanishads. He repeats it all the time in his complete works. One guess, come on guys. Which one? I can't quite follow what you're saying. Oh, Ashtavakra, that's not part of the Vedas, Ashtavakra Samhita. The Upanishad starts with a Sha. Shvet, I said this is one of the longest names of the Upanishads. It's a bit tricky. Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Amritasya putra. There's a beautiful mantra where the Upanishad refers to us, all of us, as children of immortal bliss. It's a beautiful phrase. Amritasya putra. We're children of immortality. So that's Shvetashvatara Upanishad 2.5. But then what he does is, I mentioned the semicolon. After the semicolon, he combines that verse with another verse, another mantra that comes later in the same Upanishad. Shvetashvatara Upanishad 3.8. Nanyaf panta vidyate yanaya. So these are the two. If you want to look up these references, Shvetashvatara Upanishad 2.5 and 3.8. Okay, so now, any quick questions? It's already past time, so I can take one question in person, or if there's any very germane question online, I can take maybe one question, but... Okay, good, well there you go. Okay, in person, anyone? Yeah, please, let's give David a chance.
When he says, ye children of immortality, even those who live in the highest sphere,
Yeah.
who is that highest sphere? What is it meant by that?
Yeah, there are just different lokas in Hinduism. And so there are different kinds of heavens and things, and sometimes they're rank ordered. And so even in the highest sphere, he's thinking, and people dwell in these different spheres, you know. When it comes to, Hindus believe in karma and rebirth, right? And there's what's called the population objection, or the population problem, which is that the population has been exploding in the past few centuries, right? So if that's true, where the heck are all these souls? They're new bodies, but where are the souls coming from? Each one of those bodies, right? Now we have what? How many? 6 billion or 7 billion? 8 billion, wow. Yeah, and it's kind of increasing exponentially, right? But 1,000 years ago, what was it? It was it was far fewer. So where are those souls that are inhabiting all of these new bodies? That's a question. And there's a standard answer in Hinduism, and it appeals to, number one, the fact that this is not the only loka. This is the Bhuloka, but there are many other lokas. And there are souls dwelling in these other lokas, like even the highest realm that is mentioned in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. And secondly, souls inhabit not just human bodies, but also non-human animal bodies, and even the plants So we have to take into account all of creation, not just human beings. So even if the human, and there's one passage where Swamiji actually mentions that he says, you'll notice that as the human population is increasing, the animal population is decreasing. Now, how you can prove that, I don't know. That's very difficult. But anyway. Yeah, that's right. So it's interesting. Anyway, that just reminded me of that because lokas. Lokas is it's a whole another interesting can of worms. The theory of lokas in Hinduism. Thank you. All right. This is a fun class. Hope you'll come for the next one. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.